Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Fun House alongside Mr. Martin Popoff. What's happening, Martin?
Yes. Morning, sir. Morning, sir. Well, summer seems to be back here in Toronto, but I've been doing some nice
It's
bike rides and things. So
back here in New York,
happy
man.
about that.
Yesterday, I think it was 82 yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what is going on? It's not going to. Did you look at the extended forecast? I don't know up in Canada, but I think by like Tuesday or Monday, back in the 40s. So we're going to have a 40-degree shift from this week to next week.
Yeah. I've been meaning to call our mechanic guy where we store the winter tires for both cars, right? So it's like we got it, because I'll call him and he'll say, as usual, he'll say, "Oh, we're totally booked up. I've got you 2 weeks out or whatever. You should have checked earlier." Because yeah, literally, you look at this, but yeah, it is time to put on the winter tires, believe it or not. So
Yeah, because everything could change at a dime, right? It's just like boom,
yeah,
all of a sudden. Yeah, it's drastic. Yeah. Well, hopefully you have a little bit of time before you have to worry about that.
yeah,
So.
yeah.
So today we've got an interesting show for you. This we're titling it "The Albums Where the Wheels Started to Fall Off," or "When the Cracks Started to Show." Right. So
When the wheels fell off.
the wheels
Yeah.
fell off. Yeah.
Speaking
So
of winter tires.
speaking of winter, exactly. Yes, very timely conversation here. Yeah. So those albums where you've got some notable bands where all of a sudden things are starting to like come undone, unglued. The wheels are falling off, the cracks are showing. There's things happening in the band, within the band, in the album. There could be all sorts of reasons why these wheels are all of a sudden starting to fall off, or maybe, like I said, maybe the wheels are getting wobbly with this album, and then going forward they completely fall off, right? So there's this whole concept of when did that actually start. So Martin and I have looked at like a lot of bands, notable bands, and tried to pinpoint exactly when some of those moments were. And in some cases, some of these bands have multiple times when this happened, right? Especially the bands who have been around for a long time, change lineups, and when one era stops, one begins, and when does that start to get wobbly, so on and so forth. So we've each picked out 10 examples of this across all sorts of bands, and we'll describe why we think this is the album where that wheel is falling right off. So Martin, I don't know if you want to add a little bit to that. I think we've got some other, I think you brought down in our notes some examples of why this might on appearance be happening, and why maybe it caused this rift or this falling off of the wheels or the cracks to show.
Yeah. So my notes to kind of shape what we're trying to talk about here included things like sounded like the band was running on fumes, running out of ideas, made an ill-advised change in the band, doing more drugs, worse production, worse songwriting, repeating themselves, but with weaker ideas. Maybe lost a key member or two, session guys being in there. Maybe put out a live album or greatest hits because the wheels were falling off. Album was too short. Yeah, so just various reasons why we thought, things were wobbling here a little bit.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
All right, Martin will kick us off with his first selection.
Yeah, so my first selection is Alice Cooper, Muscle of Love. Here, here it is on my Russian bootleg with Constrictor for some weird reason.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
But yeah, so yeah, we all know the story about that album cover with the wheels are falling off there, even because this caused a big problem in the record stores. A, it was too big to put in the racks. B, people thought their copy was stained because they built in a stain on the cardboard box thing. So yeah, pretty weird that was going on there. Plus, it was just expensive to make, and then caused all these problems. But yeah, the point is these guys are truly running on fumes at this point. They are knackered, to quote the UK connection. They've put out this album November 20th, 73. They already had $1 Billion Babies in March of 73. Big trouble with Glenn Buxton. He's essentially not invited to play on the album. And there's maybe some Dick Wagner or Mick Mashbeer on here. There's even Alan Schwartzberg, who's talked about drumming on some of the album. And especially like Crazy Little Child on here. But, and then it didn't get great reviews. It's a little bit of the wheels are falling off here a little bit. And you're going to see this a theme throughout our examples where it seems like they've already shown, Alice Cooper Band has already shown us all of their various tricks, and here they are just kind of doing them again, kind of thing. And it seems a little subdued, not super inspired. You know, Alice Cooper talks about, oh, we wanted to make more of a rock and roll album. The other albums are maybe a little more produced last time or whatever. This is just as produced as all of them. There's horn sections in here. The sound is good on it. But yeah, the other thing is, I mean, it's got really one metal song on it, Muscle of Love, great song. And then the big hit was Teenage Lament 74. And even that is sort of like a wistful kind of, you know, a little bit of a downer, a little bit of melancholy to it, but a good song. But you know, moving forward, you know, after 74, basically Muscle of Love got played a few times and Teenage Lament 74 a few times, but generally not much got played off of this. And it's you know, there's kind of a sexual theme to the album, but not all of it. So they tried to sort of drive that point. But basically, it just sounds like they've kind of used up their ideas. Even Bob Ezrin was not happy with the whole thing, and he exits because you know, there's just not. They're fighting within themselves. They're fighting with Bob, and then of course after this, we know the wheels fell off because this is the end of the band, and Alice goes solo. So Muscle of Love, first one.
Yeah, you also have to wonder how much Alice was being wooed by record labels to go out as a solo artist during this time period too, which probably he probably was mightily distracted at this point, besides for everything else that you talked about. So it's almost like it was inevitable that this was going to be the end of the band.
Yeah, or other projects, or like, you know, pulled by, you know, the possibility of a TV career or acting or talk show or whatever, right? Yeah. I mean, he was the guy doing all the interviews, and he was just being proven as such a personality, right? That you could see him just being tugged in various directions, and the other guys, you know, feeling left out and then not responding. And then Glenn Buxton, he's had boozing problems since Billion Dollar Babies at least, and now he's in really rough shape. So
yeah. Shame, I think, especially for Glenn. I think a real talent that just wasted the rest of his life away, you know. All right, my first selection of the day is Dio, Sacred Heart, 1985, third album. So two very successful first albums. You know, I think most people would admit, you know, that those first two albums are classics. And then here by the third album, band seems to be running on fumes just a little bit. Behind the scenes, that's where all the real dirt is happening. There is a rift between Ronnie James Dio and Vivian Campbell. Vivian, at this point in time, a young kid, wants to make money, wants to make a name for himself, and he is busy complaining about the fact that the rest of the band aren't getting paid what Ronnie's getting paid in the band. And this starts a big rift, and he apparently doesn't show up in the studio as much as he should. Ronnie and Wendy they separate during this time period. So Ronnie is pretty surly and down and depressed in the studio. Apparently the rest of the band feels all this going on. So there's this kind of like somber, like depressive mood happening in the studio, and the album kind of sounds like it. You know, you've got the two somewhat hits, Hungry for Heaven and Rock and Roll Children, which sounds like the band trying to play off the success of Rainbow in the Dark from the first album. Most of the rest of the album is not all that heavy. You got a couple really good tracks, like the title track is good, King of Rock and Roll, and a couple others, but most people find that this is kind of the lighter version of the two albums. Viv gets sacked halfway through the tour, and of course Craig Goldie comes in, and that starts a whole another era of the band. So, and this one barely squeaks to gold, so there's that too. Don't think it was as well received as the first two albums. So yeah, the cracks are happening here all over the place, and they finally fully came off after this album came out and the tour was underway, and then we got a new version of Dio going forward.
Yeah, they don't get a great album cover. The production's not good. It's noisy and screechy. The live show gets ridiculed because of the whole dragon thing and all that. Yeah. And yeah, it's funny you bring up the somberness of it, because you can feel in Ronnie's lyrics that he's really digging into that downtrodden thing more, right? So there seems to be more like psychic trauma and depression in the lyrics, whereas before the themes were the same, but there was a sense of triumph on them. And there's
a positivity on the lyrics and the sound of the other two albums, which you don't really get here. I mean, you know, things like Fallen Angels, Just Another Day, they're kind of somber, right? Not your usual type stuff that you would expect from Ronnie. So there's something hanging over the whole session of it.
Yeah. All right. My next choice is The Doors' LA Woman. Here we get to the end. There you go. We've got the idea of this being the last album. Jim Morrison dies like 2 months and 2 weeks. So what is it? 10 weeks afterwards. There's all sorts of cracks showing in this one. We've got Paul A. Rothschild. Yeah, there you go. And a terrible album cover as well.
And he looks like shit on the album. I mean, it's just that's not the Jim Morrison we know, right? Yeah, something's up there.
Exactly. And it's proven to be the case because Paul Rothschild is upset, like Jim's not showing up to rehearsals. The band, even though there's like 3 strong songwriters in the band is not turning in good material. They're fighting over Riders of the Storm and Lover Madly. So he quits. Sort of in disgust that the band is not rising up to the quality levels here. And you get Been Down So Long, Cars Hiss By My Window, and a cover of Crawling King Snake, John Lee Hooker, which are all like just blues jams, right? So you get 3 songs that are just very boring, kind of bluesy sort of tunes. Lover Madly and Riders on the Storm, interesting. I mean, these are the big hits in LA Woman. So the album does well enough.
Yeah.
It's a long album. You got the Changeling on there, is pretty cool. Hyacinth House, kind of like a soft parade, more of a poppy one. So, but again, so you get way too much of the blues thing, but you also get the Doors are such a distinct band, but they've shown us all these tricks before, and now you're just getting a tricks for another time sort of thing. LA Woman, like what a sort of a dumb title. And yeah, that album cover is ridiculous. You know what? Looking at that album cover, it reminds me of Thin Lizzy, Bad Reputation, right? Just sort of like the silliness of crappy color scheme and in typeface.
Yeah, this uninspired photo, and it's all passed together, and
yeah. So yeah, it definitely feels like nobody would have expected the next Doors album to be particularly good if there was even going to be one. And then, of course, the unspeakable happens, and then we even actually get 2 more Doors albums without Jim. So yeah, definitely this one feels like the wheels are falling off.
Yep, good choice. All right, my next one from 1975, the 6th album from this band, the Allman Brothers, Win, Lose, or Draw. And to echoes Martin's last comments, horrible album cover to boot. You don't even really have, you don't have their logo on the front. They save it for the back, which, makes absolutely no sense at all. So here, I mean, the band are absolutely falling apart at the seams. So this is a few years post the deaths of Duane Allman and Barry Oakley. So they had been trying to piece it together ever since then, but they had the monster hit album, Brothers and Sisters, which came out before this, which did really, really well, but then they really could not make that success consistent and with another album. So here, also during this time period, both Greg and Dickie are releasing solo albums. Greg is dating Cher and running out all over Los Angeles, living the rock star life with Cher, the pop life. So the band is kind of like, what the hell's going on with here? They're spending way too much time in the studio putting this album out. The band previously did not stay long in the studio. They basically got in, cut the albums, and got out. Here, month after month after month, they're in the studio. They're not really liking the material that's coming up. Nobody's writing together at this point. Everybody's got their own songs. When the album comes out, it barely squeaks to gold. And really the only song that anybody talks about on the album is Dickie Betts's really long instrumental High Falls, which I would agree is the high point of the album. The rest of it is just very, very uninspired and is seen as a massive disappointment after the huge album that came before it. So, and the band would just kind of splinter along for a couple of years before they basically break up for over a decade. So this was the beginning of, they got all the issues with drugs and stuff going forward. So yeah, this was the wheels are falling off, and they completely fall off, and the car is skidding on the ground for the rest of the decade after this.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's funny how so many of these are signaled by the album cover too. You can just tell. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
They're like, all right, so whatever.
Yeah. All right, my next one. I was toggling between these 2 albums, and I wonder what the fans would say. But I've decided on my original choice. So Anthrax we've got State of Euphoria, but I've always felt that Persistence of Time is when the wheels sort of fall off. And again, well, both of them for the album cover, right? Kind of thing. But you know, the first two full, or not the first two, but the second and the third full-length albums are unassailable. They're amazing, spreading the disease and among the living. And then people started getting on them for this, the cartoony sort of look and the yellow, and then this thing, right? The is it Mort Drucker? Anyways, the Mad Magazine, kind of look of the band. But I just remember getting these all in succession as new releases and feeling that this one, again, didn't like the album cover. It's kind of dark, fast, thin. It's got the time Joe Jackson cover thing. So, you're following up Antisocial, and they're starting to feel like, okay, they're doing the pattern of the novelty cover thing. And I didn't think it was a great choice for a cover. And yeah, I they started this album, and then there was a big fire, and they lost like $100,000 worth of their equipment, so they had to start again. So there's already bad omens going on, and of course we know after this, you get a break, and then Sound of White Noise with John Bush, and I love all of the, basically this catalog. I just love the whole thing. I now really appreciate all of it, but yeah, those John Bush albums, I still play a lot. And then when Joey comes back, I'm loving those records as well. This is a catalog where I've really had quite a renaissance with, and play regularly all of them. I just think they've grown up into adults making thrash, which is a rare thing. And it's cool when
they needed to do, I think, because I mean, those two albums kind of lost me back in the day when they came out.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, I haven't gone back to Anthrax after I like the John Bush era albums. To me, they almost don't sound too much like Anthrax, but they are Anthrax albums. But I have yet to go back and have that renaissance with the band, because I got really turned off by those couple of albums.
Interesting. So I'm not wrong in that, thinking that's a bit of a wheels fall.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. Yeah, it got a little too jokey for me. Most of the other thrash bands were doing more serious stuff, and here Anthrax are like, we're the fun party thrash band, whatever. And to me, it lost its luster really, really quickly. And I love those early albums, but yeah, they just and I never went back. Other than dabbling with the John Bush stuff, which I thought was really good, although different. Obviously, to me, it wasn't. It's almost like two different bands for me.
Yeah, and the weird titling, right? For All Kings, and I can never get the order of the words right. We have come for you all. We have come. Yeah, it's like strange, album titles. But I play those records a lot. I really like them. So, and again, yeah, they're not very thrashy. They're not a very thrashy band. It's just very musical. Yeah,
they're not. They came out in a time where all this other stuff was going on. They kind of fit right in. But for me, they quickly moved right out of that. There was a very fast gulf between what they were doing and what like Metallica and Megadeth and Slayer were doing, and certainly like Testament and Overkill and all those other bands. But I'm not saying it's better or worse. Just to me, there was a big difference there. So I think they're always included in the big four thrash, but I always thought there were other bands that probably would have made more sense than Anthrax. But of course, everybody holds those first handful of albums so near and dear. It's like they're there by default, I think. But
4 gold records in a row.
Yeah,
I mean, they're a very successful band, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. And they were kick ass live back in the day. I mean, I always like to go see Anthrax live. Back in the mid-late 80s. And
cool.
All right. My next choice from 1983, the 11th album from this band. It's a concept album. Kilroy Was Here. Looked at by many people as one of the most ridiculous concept albums in rock history. Some people really love it. Most people hate it. And they cite this as where basically broke up the band, which when you look at it really was the case. This whole idea of this kind of like rock opera, this dystopian society, kind of conceived by Dennis DeYoung. He's like the driving force here in the band. I think he really wanted this band to be like this theatrical pop band. That's kind of what he was really into, and the seeds of this were already happening on Paradise Theater. But here he writes or co-writes a good chunk of the album. He sings a good chunk of the album. They planned this whole elaborate stage show, which the rest of the band hated, but it made a lot of money. I mean, the album went platinum, so it's not like this was not successful, but it basically solidified a rift that was already happening in the band, specifically between him and Tommy Shaw. And Tommy Shaw left after the tour. If you go look at any footage and photos from this tour, Tommy looks like he's really uncomfortable. In fact, most of the band do. They're wearing all these weird costumes, and it's just like, it's kind of ridiculous. But like I said, it was kind of successful. But the album went platinum. It went to number 3. But after it was done, Tommy was like, sayonara, I'm going to a solo career. He went to solo career, formed Damn Yankees, and didn't return to the band until around the mid-90s for the big reunion. But yeah, basically this kind of broke up Styx for a number of years, and or at least broke up the classic lineup of the band, and looked at one of the weirdest concept albums in all of rock history. But there is some good stuff on there. I won't panic completely, because I do like parts of it. But yeah, it's a weird album, and definitely the wheels are falling off at this point. But you know, this followed up a string of really successful albums, all the way back to Grand Illusion up to Paradise Theater. We're talking about multi-platinum albums, all of them. So even though this one went platinum, this was the worst seller out of all of those. So
yeah. Interesting, and a good transition, because Styx is an example where you might because when we came up with this concept, we were thinking, how far back do you go to the you know, the nut being just, the torque isn't completely torqued on here to the point where you're right up to breaking the bolt off, right? You know, versus all the nuts coming off and the wheel really coming off, sort of thing. So that brings up a point with Iron Maiden. So this is a bit of a controversial one, because I'm going to go back to the nut just needing a little more torque on 1 of 4, where the wheel's not coming off yet. But you notice something about this album versus the last album. And, you know, I was going to pick Somewhere in Time, but I thought, well, let's go back to Powerslave and mention this, because, you know, I've always been of the opinion that Iron Maiden made 5 completely different sounding albums. Hang on, let me add them up here. So 5, 1, 2, 3, 4 completely different sounding albums, right? That were all amazing, but were all, you know, quite different from each other, different personalities, different productions, you know, different drummer, different singer, some of that stuff going on. But I remember distinctly getting this as a new release, thinking this is basically a Peace of Mind again, ticking off the boxes. Everything's a little looser, a little punkier. There's still some amazing stuff on here. I still love Maiden, but this is the first one where I thought they've settled into a sound, and that was a great sound to settle into. Peace of Mind is just like the chemistry, the 5-way chemistry, exponentially to however many that works out, is awesome, right? But here you get that happening, and then on the next one, it's really confirmed for you. And then basically, Maiden never changes their sound ever again. I think basically Peace of Mind, it gets set, and from there on forward, you know, whether it's having this awesome, distinct drummer in the band, or this singer in the band, or the fact that the singer and the bass player write identical lyrics, and they just have all the same things they favor for lyrical topics, and all the guitarists essentially sound the same as each other. You know, it takes a guitarist to really actually tell them apart. So for all these reasons, I mean, they settle on a sound. But I totally remember that as a kid, however, what 21 years old or whatever at that point, thinking that they are repeating themselves. So the wheels are falling off a little, and the wheels are falling off a little as well, because I remember always thinking it sounded like a slightly looser, wilder version of Peace of Mind.
yeah, I'm glad one of us picked Maiden. I thought about it too, and we could probably do this whole show on Maiden, talking about some of the other cracks and wobbly wheels happening, because I was thinking about it too, and I was like, well, you could make an argument for Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. You can make an argument for Somewhere in Time, right? Because of the use of guitar synthesizers, and fans are starting to say, they're adding some stuff here we're not entirely 100% comfortable with. Seventh Son is the last with Adrian Smith for a bit, right? You've got, you could look at Fear of the Dark, as the completely fallen off, and Bruce saying, all right, I'm done with this type of thing. Yeah, there's lots of points here in this catalog that you can kind of look and see where that screw comes loose and the wobble starts to happen. But yeah, I mean, we all love Powerslave, right? But it's not all that much different from the album that came before it when you really, really think about it, as great as it is. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a real thought-provoking one, because it's and they've got a formula. It's familiar. We all love it, right? And the band really loves it, and they don't waver from it. But there's subtle differences here and there along the way. Yeah, that's a really good pick.
But Maiden is amazing. I mean, this reminds me of that discussion we had about how you could pick a top 10 new wave of British heavy metal albums, and 5 of them would be by Iron Maiden, and 3 of them would be by Def Leppard. You could literally put 8 albums by 2 different bands in a, and you wouldn't be completely wrong, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that just goes to show you the strength of the catalogs, right? Yeah. All right, my next choice is from 1980, 7th album from this American band. It is Kansas Audio Visions. So here, this is the first album in a whole long string where the success of the band seems to be dipping quite a bit, and it coincides with something going on with one of the band members. So here we've got Kerry Livgren has moved over fully to a Christian lifestyle. It's finally starting to fully seep into the lyrics here, and then there's this divide between the 2 main songwriters, which Kerry Livgren and Steve Walsh. And so by this point in time, they're fighting with whose songs are going to make the album. And when you listen to the record, you hear the lighter, airier, more positive stuff are Kerry's songs and lyrics, and then Steve is going for the more harder rock kind of boogie type stuff on here. So there's this gulf happening in the band. This album is probably less progressive rock based on the ones that came before it. It's definitely more of kind of like a hard rock AOR album with touches of prog, which is a drastic difference from Monolith, Left Overture, Point of No Return, all the albums that came before. This album only goes on to sell gold, so it's less successful than the 6 that came before it. And Steve Walsh grows really tired of what's going on in the band. He winds up leaving the band after this tour to go form Streets and do some solo stuff. Right, we don't see him back in the band until later on in the 80s. But the next couple of albums, we see John Elefante comes in the band on vocals, much more prevalent Christian lyrics, much more AOR melodic rock material. So yeah, it all really started happening on this album, and they wouldn't kind of find their way back to traditional Kansas music for a number of years afterwards. But yeah, Audio Visions, Kansas.
It's amazing. What a different world. I mean, I'm amazed. I didn't know that it went gold. I mean, imagine that album going gold, and imagine a 25-year-old kid telling him that. It's like, what? Crazy to think that thing went gold.
I know. Yeah. And again, not a great album cover either. Kind of weirdly put together, and we're in the 80s now.
Really modern.
Yeah, I mean, I like the album personally, but it's definitely not, I don't consider it a classic Kansas album, and it's just drastically different than the ones that came before it. But again, another example of a band moving into a new decade and trying to figure out where do we fit now, right? All those prog bands in the 70s were doing the same thing. Everybody's like, how do we adapt and gain the same type of success in this new decade where that old prog stuff is kind of like dinosaur music, and we need to change up our sound. So it's a good album. It's a good early 80s album. It's rocking, it's melodic, right? But is it real Kansas prog? Not really.
An annoying title too, right? You take 2 words, you kind of make a new word, but you don't, because you got a dash in there. Audio Vision, Audio Slave, Soundgarden, right?
Yeah.
It's just that sort of weird. Yeah. All right. My next choice is Heart with Private Audition. The band themselves say that this is the Wheels Falling Off album. It was not successful. It didn't certify. I like it. I mean, I find it really charming and cool, but it's missing the confidence and the heft and the good production, frankly, of Baby Lestrange and the earlier material. But yeah, some really good stuff on here. Cities Burn. I mean, they try to be a little heavy on it, but there's also Private Audition. The title track does not live up to a big sort of title tracks kind of song. It's the last with Steve Fossen and Mike DeRozier, right? And then they have the break and the sort of like the retooling for an album. I think that should have been absolutely massive. Passion Works, but it wasn't. But that same sort of sound did work massively after that. But yeah, this is more of like almost like a folky, modest, smallish sort of sounding album. They don't sound like a stadium band here, and they don't have that stadium confidence to it. But I do like the album, but it's just considered a dark period in the band with a lot of turmoil going on, and yeah, just not. It just doesn't sound like the world beating heart of the old.
Yeah, especially after like David Lestrange and those couple albums, which were pretty big for them. And yeah, it's a very kind of like nondescript album in their catalog. I do like it too. I'm glad you picked it. I was looking at that as well. That's a good one. It's a good choice. Cool. All right. Next up for me, a band that has lots of these wheels falling off moments, and usually bands who have been around for a long, long time and have lots of albums, you will find that is the case. I decided to pick my wheels falling off moment for Uriah Heep to be Return to Fantasy 1975. And I thought long and hard about this because there are a couple of albums around this time period where you can kind of say this, but I picked this for a reason. So this is from 1975, their 8th studio album. So this is the first album without Gary Thane on bass. So basically the classic lineup of the band is no longer at this point in time. They replace him with John Wetton, which is a really interesting choice because he's not just a bass player, right? Wetton, known at the time, he was the lead singer and bass player for King Crimson. He was with Roxy Music and all these other bands, Family. So his vocal prowess is well known. At the same time, the band were also having issues with David Byron. So they were having issues out on the road with him. He had a really bad alcohol problem. They were complaining about his vocals not sounding great live. Certainly in the studio, his vocals are not, the last couple of albums before this, maybe not as strong as some of the earlier stuff. So I think they brought in Wetton for one of two reasons. They needed a strong bass player, and they wanted someone who was a really good singer to really back up David Byron out on the road. And he even does some vocal work on both this album and High and Mighty, which comes afterwards. I think it's a solid record, but also here you don't really have any classic songs on this album. And sales are pretty much down overall in the catalog. But I like this album personally. I don't consider it one of their top albums, but I think it's pretty good. But I think here is where it all the kind of the writing is on the wall for David Byron. He would stay on for one more album, the High and Mighty album. Wetton also one more album, but after that album, they're both gone, and then we have a completely new lineup of Uriah Heep going forward with John Lawton and Trevor Bolder. And so to me, I think this is the first album fully where the wheels are coming off for the band, that there would be others going forward. So yeah, Return to Fantasy.
Yeah, it's funny, almost as a metaphor for the doom of the band, is that title track is so kind of haunting, and it's heavy, and it's got the shuffle thing going, but the chord changes are just so dark, eh?
Yeah.
It's a weird song that's really depressing. But yeah, it sounds like all the weight of the world, or the psychic drama of being Uriah Heep is like, weighing down upon that song, right?
Yeah, but the whole album is kind of like that, though. These are just like, some of these songs are just like kind of like, Your Turn to Remember. Devil's Daughter is good, but like Beautiful Dream, Why Did You Go? I mean, it's just like there's this kind of like a little bit of mediocrity on this album that I like it personally, but there's nothing like overly potent on this album, and it just sounds like they're going through the motions a little bit. And they were on the road constantly at this point in time, and you got the issues with Byron, and Gary Thane winds up passing away. It's a bad time, I think, in their history. So not surprising they cranked out an album like this. Like I said, I like it, but I think definitely the wheels are falling off at this point.
Yeah. All right. My next choice is Saxon Crusader. Yep. So with this record, it's got the personality, the Nigel Glockler personality to it, but it's got a very obscure, weird, gutted production sound. It's got good bass and good treble, but there's kind of this cavern in the middle. It feels like they're adjusting badly to the idea of hair metal starting to be an important thing. So you got Bad Boys Like to Rock and Roll, and Run for Your Lives is actually pretty cool. It's I want to compare this album to Judas Priest Turbo in that a lot of people like it a lot and a lot of people don't like it. It kind of divides a lot of people, right? But Run for Your Lives, I really want to compare that to the song Reckless. I think it's a good, dark horse song on here that's rising in estimation among fans. But Just Let Me Rock, not great. I think the ones that people like the most are, well, actually a little bit of What You Fancy is not great as well. The ones that have sort of the they feel like songs that needed to be written and are really good are Crusader, where they're kind of doing the epic thing, kind of for the first, well, I guess it is for the first time, but Sailing to America is the kind of song that Turbo doesn't have. Like Sailing to America is a song that's really light, but it's really actually one of people's favorites, and it's one of my favorites on the album. Turbo doesn't have that. Turbo, the most light and airy and poppy songs on there are all reviled, right? They're hated, right? But it's funny that Sailing to America almost points to a direction that had they had a bunch of mellower and poppier songs that were this good, they put it first on the album, which is kind of cool. It's got that whole Hello America, Def Leppard, Sailing to America thing. So this hopefulness to it, and even the Mayflower is in it. But yeah, it's kind of interesting that had they written better songs, they might have excelled a little better in this whole hair metal idea, but they didn't. The subsequent albums saw them sort of falling, flat on their face. The wardrobe looked terrible, and the guys looked like of an older generation. Kind of an oddball match of looks in the band as well. So after this is the last one where it has kind of a distinct and intriguing and interesting personality, although overall the songs are just not all that great. And after this, even that personality thing would be kind of gone, and it would be hit or miss on the songs. But yeah, Crusader, you definitely feel the wheels falling off. They don't know how they're going to fit in this new reality with the new wave of British heavy metal dead and gone.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of good points, and I think trying too hard to make it in America, right, and maybe moving too far away from what their core sound is all about. I don't know. I remember when that album first came out, I really liked it a lot. I don't enjoy it as much as I used to, nearly as much as I used to. Love the title track, love a couple other songs on it, but for the most part, I think it's a miss. And you have to wonder if Saxon just kind of stayed true to what they were all about. If they decided, well, Power and the Glory, which a lot of us look at as their best album, if they would have kind of stayed in that sort of format, don't you think they still would have caught on here? Like, I don't know. It's like they went out of their way to fit in, and I think that by them doing that, they kind of shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, it's true. We know there are examples of 70s and 80s bands who stayed relatively heavy or figured out a way to navigate into this whole thing, because ultimately, the new wave of British heavy metal and hair metal both prove that people like metal, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned Turbo before. I heard Turbo Lover on Sirius XM last night driving home from my parents. I totally got into it. I was like, oh yeah. Back in the day, I would have been like, fuck this song, right? But yeah, I don't know. That's something about Turbo Lover. When you go see Priest live nowadays, not to derail the conversation, but it's amazing how for a song, an album that got shit on for so many years by Priest fans, when you go see Priest live now, Turbo Lover gets like almost the biggest reaction of the night live, and it sounds great live on stage. It's just weird how your perception of some of these things changes over the years.
Well, you think of all the parts to that song and the chord changes and how it builds and builds and builds. It's just a geniusly written song.
Right? Yeah, I absolutely agree with it. I never thought I would have said that 30, 40, 35 years ago. But now, all these years later, I'm like, that's a great song. It really is. Go figure. All right, my next choice is from 1979, 12th album by this band, Stormwatch by Jethro Tull. So this is the last album with the classic lineup of the bands, but right after the album, John Evan is sacked. Barrymore Barlow on drums is sacked. Dee Palmer is sacked, and John Glasscock dies. So right then you've got the genesis of this era of the band that's really beloved by fans, the kind of whole folk prog era of the band that started with Songs from the Wood, Heavy Horses, and Stormwatch, basically just completely broken apart. So here, all four wheels, Martin, are just popped and flying off. There's nothing left at the end of this album. This album also, even though it's part of that trilogy of albums, really dark, not quite as wistful and engaging. I love it. A lot of people love it, but it's definitely, of the three, a little bit different. And again, what year is it? It's 1979. So another example of a band, and here you got like kind of like a prog band, getting ready to move into the next decade, figuring out what the hell they want to do. Ian Anderson, very smart. I'm sure he was already thinking, we've got to start embracing some new things. We've got to make some changes. And, with the next album, the A album, and then Broadsword and the Beast and everything going forward, utilizing all this new synthesizer technology and different styles of music, moving away from the folk and all that sort of thing. And the next albums are drastically different, but still a gold seller though, however, but not as big a seller. I mean, the Tull has a ridiculous run of platinum and gold albums all throughout the 70s, and this would be the last of them. So yeah, Jethro Tull, Stormwatch, wheels are falling off in a major way. Basically, the whole lineup is gone, other than him and Martin Barr. That's it.
Yeah. Great album cover too, and they have a lot
great
of
album cover. Yeah.
Those guys. Yeah. Okay, so my next choice, following upon and inspired by our episode we did with Hack on Motorhead, I'm going with Iron Fist. This is a classic one that people talk about that way. It's got a crappy album cover. It's not a great album.
I don't mind it, actually.
Yeah, it's different. They've done, the color scheme. I think it might have been photographed a little better, maybe put a background on it. I agree. Just have the one-tone Motorhead and Iron Fist on it. Great concept, actually. But yeah, the point here is that Fast Eddie's getting ticked off that he's got to produce the album and write as well, and then not really get paid to produce the album. The production on it isn't that great. It's got kind of a cloistered, tight, uptight bass sound on it. I'm noticing, I like the album quite a bit, but I'm noticing that it is a disaster of sequencing. I think Iron Fist, Heart of Stone, and I'm the Doctor to kick off the album are terrible. They're just kind of like the sped up, not inspired in terms of like the chord sequence or the riff. They're just kind of a weird, uncomfortable speed for the band. I don't think the drumming's particularly great at this speed from Filthy on here. But later on, you get amazing songs on here. Shut It Down is actually really cool. Speed Freak is not that great, but Don't Let Him Grind You Down, Don't Need Religion, the two with parentheses on it in a row, kind of funny. Sex and Loser is amazing as well. Go to Hell. So there's a lot of really great Motorhead anthems on here. But it's a funny thing where psychologically, if you think of putting on an album and plays going down as you go through an album or a CD or sequencing or whatever. I mean, an album has two sides, but still, those three in a row are a really weak way to start this album off. And I think that might have affected a lot of people. But also, again, with this idea of the wheels falling off, one of the big things is when a band is really remarkable because they got a lot of cool tricks, eventually when you hear all their tricks, it's like the next time you hear those tricks, it's not so impressive anymore. So, and of course, we know after this, Brian Robertson replaces Fast Eddie, and you get a similar album again. The band's sound doesn't particularly change. People always hone in on those 4 or 5 little parts on Another Perfect Day that are wildly different, and the solos. But other than that, they're writing the same kind of songs.
Sounds like Motorhead.
But yeah, so this is always considered the least good, although Bomber gets in for some abuse as well. Bomber or this one of those 4 in there after the debut, get the most abuse, and this was not reviewed well in the press either. So
no, and you have to wonder. I mean, following up Ace of Spades was never going to be an easy task, regardless, right? So yeah, personally, I like the album. I don't think it's one of their best, but I think it's a good album. All right, next up for me, a fourth album from this band, 1973, Wishbone Ash, Wishbone 4. First of all, let's take a look at that cover.
Yeah.
So of course, this album follows up Argus, which had a great cover, and then you get this, which basically, hi, it's your fourth album. Here we are, right?
Yeah,
whatever, green, and this not very inspired. So this
of course,
is
to get that shot, they had to borrow Pat Travers's fans.
100%. Yes, gotta get the wind flowing, right? Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because look, you got Martin and Andy's hair. And Andy probably. Andy, if you're watching, I'm sorry, but Andy's probably looking at this saying, boy, I had a nice head of hair back then. I could actually do that. Now it's like, not so much. But anyway, last album with guitarist Ted Turner. That's him right in the front. You got Tim Martin right there. This is, it's interesting because this album, when you listen to this back to back, it's kind of like the whole Motorhead thing, right? When you listen to this back to back with what is considered by a lot of people their classic album, it really pales in comparison. So where you had all sorts of things working on the Argus album, it's got hard rock, it's got prog, it's got folk, it's got blues rock, it's got a little bit of jazz. Here, this is like much more of a laid back, folky album. Not a ton of the twin guitar harmonies that they were, known for at the time. And granted, there's some good stuff on here. Battle of the Beacons got some nice moments. You got some boogie stuff like Rock and Roll Widow. Sorrel is pretty good. Doctor is okay. It's like folky. It's kind of boogie. It's very uninspired. It sounds tired. The band sounds like they're running out of steam. And of course, Ted Turner, basically after this album, decided sayonara, and he doesn't come back to the band for many years. They bring in another guitar player, Laurie Weisfield. He invigorates the band, and then they have a string of really strong albums going forward after this. So this is a perfect example of wheels falling off. Get the snow tires on, Martin, and all of a sudden, all things are well going forward, right? So, but here, this to me is my least favorite of the original lineups for albums by far. It's got some good songs, but you could definitely tell that there was some shit going on here, and basically that lineup was no longer after this particular album.
Yeah, cool. My favorite is Just Testing. I love that album.
Oh, great album. Yeah, I like it quite a bit.
Okay, my next choice, a bit of a weird one for our show, is The Replacements. All Shook Down, right? I always get this mixed up with All Shook Up by Cheap Trick. But so the idea here is that, this band started off, all sorts of punk rock fire to them, short songs. And then they started to be, people started noticing, wow, these guys are amazing songwriters, right? Paul Westerberg in particular, and Tim and Pleased to Meet Me. But, I think the wheels start falling off with this one, and you can almost feel it from the album cover, boring album cover. And we just get Paul on the cover. And then you got the two, poor stray wet dogs on we could do a whole show on the dog album covers, right?
Right.
But yeah, the idea here is that this was going to be a Paul Westerberg solo album. So you realize the other guys are their songs are starting to get rejected. Chris Mars, he's on his way out for this album, and basically it's one of those situations where one songwriter starts excelling, and people are really, the label, everybody's starting to realize there's an amazing, like literally for the ages, amazing kind of songwriter in the band. So this was going to be a Paul Westerberg solo album, but it's got some session guys on it, different drummers, as we said, and again, there's a little bit of that feel that I feel is a parallel with Soul Asylum, where they get mellow, they get wimpy, the production gets good. There's more acoustic guitars. It's more Americana. It's more roots rock, and you really start feeling it here, and then it's even more so here. So let's see, and you get the Have You Seen Lucky on the back. So it's just the whole thing just feels like a weak tea version of The Replacements, and you start feeling a little bit sad that that the cusp, the changeover albums where you have the best of both worlds happening on like Tim and Pleased to Meet Me, where they're like stonesy and rock and rollsy and the songwriting's amazing and you get the occasional acoustic thing and you get this nice mix. The mix is gone. They're now behaved. They're now, dare we say corporate sort of thing. I mean, they would hate to be called corporate, but it's kind of the same thing that happened with Soul Asylum on Grave Dancers Union and Runaway Train and all that, where you had that happening. So yeah, the wheels are definitely off here, and the end of the band, and then oh, Paul Westerberg is a solo artist, and we get a ton of solo albums. So there you go.
Yeah, you have to wonder how much of that is driven by record labels and what they want from you, as opposed to what the band really wants to do.
Yeah.
To say. Yeah. All right, we mentioned them before, but I'm going to bring them up again. Judas Priest, Ram It Down, 1988, seventh album. Right. I guess a lot of people could say the cracks are already starting on Turbo, but Turbo was pretty successful. And I think even though it was different, you either loved it or you hated it. Right. But I think most part people dug into it. But here for this album, so they're still using Tom Allman on production, but the band is in the studio with them as well. There's even more guitar synth on this album. The biggest thing, you've got Dave Holland's drums are basically replaced by drum programming, electronic drums on here, right? Drum synths, which is kind of bizarre. You got a terrible cover of Johnny Be Good on here, which should have never made it to this album. And it's just, this album is like, even though there are some heavy moments, and I think people who wanted the heavier Priest maybe were disappointed in Turbo, you got some pretty good stuff on here. The title track is good. There's a couple others, but man, song titles, Martin. Heavy Metal, Love Zone, Come and Get It, Hard as Iron, Blood Red Skies. That's a good song. I'm a Rocker. Give me a break. Monsters of Rock. Does it get any more cliche heavy metal than that? It's just ridiculous, right? It's almost like the band is becoming a parody of themselves. And, thankfully, when Painkiller came out, everybody was like, thank God the Judas Priest we know and love are back. So I remember the time most people shit on this. There is some good stuff on here, but for the most part, I consider this one of the weaker efforts. And of course, this was the last with Dave Holland, whatever he was doing on here. If he worked on any of the drum program on here, I don't even know, but he was so disgusted with what was going on with the band. His days were numbered. And of course, they bring Scott in, and then all is well after this. But yeah, wheels are falling off completely here, Martin.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other obvious one is Point of Entry, where basically it seemed like a weak T version of the idea of British Steel, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, my next one, I actually switched one out for this. I'm going with Bluish Occult Revolution by Night. To me, it feels like Fire of Unknown Origin was a super strong album. Some people think it's a little compromised commercially because of the association with the heavy metal soundtrack, where it almost feels like half the album is a concept album, but I love the songs on it. I think they navigated the change into the 80s with aplomb. It's modern, it's cool. Alan Lanier has moved from a boogie woogie piano player to a really interesting, thoughtful synth kind of guy, and fits into the whole thing. And that album had fire in the belly, and it was successful. It had hits.
Great album.
And then you get to this, and you've got Bruce Fairbairn, at a semi-early part of his career, and he does not a great job with it. Albert Bouchard is gone, and we've got Rick Downey in on drums, and we've got a lot of Simmons kind of tom sounds on it. It's not very heavy. Even when its songs are written heavy, they're not produced very heavy. We've had some Contrarians episodes lately where we just did a Dark Horse episode on Club Ninja, and an interesting sort of thought I've had on this whole thing is that Club Ninja almost sounds like it could have been the album before this album, because both of them sound like they're part of proto hair metal, pre-hair metal, that whole Loverboy, Night Ranger, Sammy Hagar, who else would fit into that? Anyways, that whole before hair metal AOR sound, post punk rock, before hair metal. And I think this is like that. It just is an album out of time. It sounds like a 1981, 1982 album, even though it's 83, as does Club Ninja. It doesn't sound like an 86 sort of album, 85, 86. So yeah, the wheels are definitely falling off here. The songwriting, they're, you know, the lyrics are a little goofy. Yeah, they don't sound like a tough rockin' band anymore. They sound like just kind of out of place, a little bit lost.
Yeah, they definitely sound like they've fallen, like running out of steam by that point. And I really don't like the production of that album. It's just really slick. And I think with, you know, some of the songs I do like, but I'm just wondering with like a little more oomph in the production end, I think that might have been a much more successful album to me anyway.
Yeah.
And it's funny, you know, you mentioned Club Ninja. That's an album I think so many people crapped all over back in the day. That's not too bad. I can listen to Club Ninja and think, this is okay. This is okay. My grown-up self appreciates it for what it is.
Yeah.
All right, next up, 1979, eighth album from this band, the Electric Light Orchestra, Discovery. So pretty good selling album. Not as well received as Out of the Blue or a couple that came before. But here you've got Jeff Lynne, driving force of the band, really the driving force of the band by this point in time, fully embracing like modern pop music, even like there's lots of disco elements on this album, but mainly what's happening here is this whole, you know, and the name of the band, the last word is orchestra, right? And they were always known for that because they always had this, you know, string trio or whatever. And so here, Mick Kaminsky, Hugh McDowell, and Melvin Gale don't even appear on the album. Although Lewis Clark Orchestra is still here, so there is still an orchestra on this album, but basically Jeff doesn't give those guys anything to do. Although funny enough, the videos they did for the album, they appear in the videos, but they don't play on the album, which is just bizarre. I think at this point, Jeff really realized that we can either bring in a full orchestra or we can have all these new synthesizers and all this great new keyboard technology basically do what those string guys, the violin and cellist, did before us. So do we really need them anymore? And so here, the classic, very classical inspired pop and rock and a little bit of prog music that ELO is known for, it's kind of non-existent here. It's a good album. I like it. Lots of people dug it, but it's very much a pop album, very catchy stuff, very much trendy with all the latest synthesizer technology, long on hooks, but I really miss those soaring violins and that ominous cello. But going forward, there would be basically no orchestra going forward with the band. He would basically, Richard Tandy and Jeff would just work on all these really grandiose symphonic orchestrations using synthesizers and, but all those kind of classical elements basically by this time and going forward, basically done. Hence, it's no longer really an Electric Light Orchestra. It's just ELO.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. An early example of being replaced by robots, right?
Kind of, yeah. Yes, exactly. 40 plus years ago. Yep.
Yeah. All right. My last choice, kind of an interesting one. I thought this was a little amusing when I thought of this one. So we've got the Clash Sandinista. But the funny thing about this album is that it's more like the wheels are falling off on the last record of this 3-record set. So it's interesting, you know, you always play, you know, people play that game of if you could pick your favorite songs off here, could you make an album better than London Calling? But the funny thing is, they really do back end all the goofing around stuff on here, like the repeated things and the guest singers and the dub versions of things. So basically, when you get to the end of the album, it's almost like you could have just picked sides 1 through 4 and said this is almost as good as London Calling kind of thing. And it's a similar sort of sound. They're basically playing in all sorts of different rock idioms. They're all over the map versus the first 2 albums, which are pretty heavy and punky, right? But the funny thing is, when you look at sides 5 and 6, Lose the Skin, Charlie Don't Surf, Men's Fourth Hill, not so much Charlie Don't Surf, but Kingston Advice, The Street Parade, Version City, Living in Fame, Silicon on Sapphire, Version Partner, so you get the repeat, Career Opportunities as a repeat sort of thing, Shepherd's Delight. So you get a lot of songs that are just like filling space, right? And the funny thing about side 5 and side 6 is they do point to what you're going to hear on Combat Rock, and Combat Rock is kind of going to point to what you hear on Cut the Crap. So they start this new version of the band 2/3 of the way through Sandinista, which is kind of weird. So the wheels are I think the wheels fall off because I don't really like Combat Rock all that much, even though it was their biggest album, because it's got the 2 hits, which are kind of novelty songs. But I think the wheels are falling off where the band becomes enamored with sounds and dub and this jamminess and spaces, and not really being great songwriters anymore. So yeah, weird. The wheels start falling off. Record 3 of Sandinista, and essentially the rest of the band sounds like that until they're done.
How did that album sell, Martin?
It's hard to tell with the whole, I don't think it sold particularly well. Being a triple, I mean, it was priced lower, but London Calling is, I think, a platinum album, but again, it's a double thing, right?
Right.
So yeah, this band was actually pretty successful for not having that many albums, but yeah, this is basically considered the dark hole album where you can just explore it. There's so much amazing material on it. I love it. But yeah, it's funny how the filler, they stuck it on, essentially stuck it on side 5 and side 6.
Yeah, you have to wonder if that album would have just been a much tighter double. As while you were talking, I was thinking of something similar. I like Fleetwood Mac Tusk is another one I didn't even think of, but to me, that would have been a much better single album rather than a double. Because I think as a double, it's a mess, and it sounds like the Sandinistas probably would have been trim it down, and you have a pretty tight album right there.
Yeah, and redo the album covers of Rumors and Fleetwood Mac too, right? just give us the same album cover again, give us all the hits, and that would have been a diamond album, right?
Yeah, that Tusk album cover. Oof.
Yeah,
no good. All right, my last choice for today is the 5th studio album. It's hard to believe this is the 5th studio album from this band at this time, not including the live album, but it's from 1977, ELP, Emerson, Lake and Palmer Works Volume 1. So here, well received. Most people like it. But I think this is where the cracks finally started to happen. So if you need to do an album where you're all doing solo pieces, it's basically a double album, and you're only giving us 2 band compositions or 2 tracks where the full band is playing, something's got to be going on behind the scenes, right? So here you've got, and unlike the Sandinistas example, here they save the 2 band combinations or compositions all the way for the end. Right, so you got to get through all of this solo stuff before you get to Fanfare for the Common Man and Pirates, which are both excellent. But then you got the Keith Emerson's piano concerto, you've got Greg Lake's all his little pop ditties, and then you got Carl Palmer's collection of all sorts of odds and ends here. So from a musicianship standpoint, some pretty cool stuff happening here, but it doesn't sound like an Emerson, Lake and Palmer album. They would follow this up with another one, Works Volume 2. So again, now all of a sudden you have all these years that are going by after brain salad surgery, where you've got these like basically solo things, and then they come out with Love Beach, which by this time the guys couldn't stand each other. The album was terrible, not well received, awful album cover, band is done. So yeah, but for me, I think the wheels are already falling off here in this band, and they would completely just disintegrate going forward.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, Amagama situation kind of, right?
Yeah, basically, yeah, pretty much. There's some good stuff on there, but how often do people really play Works in its entirety anymore? I don't know. I certainly don't. But you got any ones we haven't mentioned, Martin?
Yeah, and you've got some honorable mentions too, right? Yeah, I mean, I'd switched out Nazareth Rampant because I felt like the wheels were falling off, but then they went back on real quick again, so I moved that one out. I had Alice Cooper, Lace and Whiskey. I had Uriah Heep, Equator. I suppose the wheels are falling off of that nice period of those 3 albums at that point. Overkill, Souls of Black. People always complain about that. Yes, Big Generator feels like a redo, the difficult second redo of an inspired album. Afterburner, kind of the same thing. AC/DC, Fly on the Wall. Then Lizzie, Chinatown, people talk about that as being a little uninspired, like did these songs need to be written at this point in time, right? Frank Zappa, Joe's Garage, Act 2 and 3. I thought the strength of that whole concept is mostly on Joe's Garage, the first one, right? And then they do the double. Foreigner 4. Quiet Riot, Condition Critical, same album again. Motley Crue, Theater of Pain. People think, the wheels are definitely falling off there on that one. So there you go. Those are my honorable mentions.
Cool. Yeah, what do I got left here? So I got Gentle Giant, The Missing Piece. Probably the first in the trio of albums, the last 3, which people feel is not quite up to speed with the rest of the stuff. Kiss Dynasty. all of this, one of the biggest bands in the world, and then they would do this album, they do a disco song. Who's playing on the album? Is Ace on any of these songs? Does Peter even drum on it? It's just, personally, I like it. You mentioned Big Generator. I'd even go further and say Talk, because this lineup regroups again after Union, and then they kind of fizzle after this. We've got New Improved from Blue Cheer, which basically doesn't have any of the big, loud, raucous fuzz music from the first two albums. There's even half of the album is one lineup, half of the album is another lineup. Which is the one going forward? Who the hell knows? What else? Deep Purple, Who Do We Think We Are? That's kind of like the last gasp of the Mark II era of the band. It's not quite as inspired as the albums that came before. Night Ranger, Man in Motion, lots of stuff going on there. Jack Blades leaves and forms Damn Yankees right after that album. And Europe, Prisoners in Paradise, which follows up a big, huge album. It doesn't do well at all. The band basically disintegrates at that point in time, and they don't regroup again until a number of years later. So, yeah, that's what I got.
Sweet. Excellent.
Cool. All right, Martin, give us an update on what's happening on the Contrarians, and new books in stock, and podcast, all that good stuff.
Yeah, we've knocked down a few more episodes of the Contrarians, where we've done well. And I did that Rolling Stones review that's getting a lot of abuse and controversy. But yeah, we've done Dark Horses on Club Ninja, which will show up soon. Slaves and Masters. We did one on Caring for Your Vinyl Collection. We did one on Rockstar Deaths. Yeah, so bunch of stuff coming there. The books are all at martinpopoff.com. And of course, I have an audio podcast every single week, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff.
It's amazing, Martin, how many people, after I posted my Rolling Stone Hackney Diamonds review, had to tell me, Pete, what's wrong with Martin? Why didn't he like this album? I'm like, not everybody's going to love Hackney Diamonds. I mean, it's just like, you either like it or whatever. It's like, I'm not going to get mad at Martin because he doesn't like it as much as me. I don't love it. I think it's really good. But it's like, is it one of the best Rolling Stones albums ever? No. Is it the best album they've done in a while? I would say so, at least for me. I enjoy it. But
well, it's in my sort of ideas doc that we're going to talk about. There is a mention of that. So maybe we do a show where we talk about that album a little more and have a little showdown about it. So that's one of the ideas. So we'll see.
That works. Okay. Sounds good. Wait and see, everybody. So this is on the web at www.chtranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please do hit the like button before you leave. Stay tuned. Coming up later this afternoon, we got Ken Golden coming in for the Professor's Picks, new releases day. He's got a whole bunch of new power metal, prog, fusion stuff coming out today. So tune in to see what's new, what's hitting the stores today. And then Grant Arthur from the Contrarians and Grant's Rock Warehouse coming in on Sunday. He and I are going to rank the catalog of Night Ranger. So stay tuned for that. Should be a fun show. Lots of albums. I think there's like 13 of them. So we're going to rank all of them. So till then, stay tuned next week for Friday Morning Funhouse alongside Martin Popoff. I am Pete Pardo. Have a good weekend, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.